been waiting for has now finally arrived.
From knockouts to tap-outs.
It's all over!
Inside the octagon and beyond.
Is this not real now? Are we pretending?
We're rich, baby. Break out the red panties.
This is the MMA Report with Jon Pollak.
Unbelievable!
Here we go!
Welcome to another edition of the MMA Report. I'm your host, Jon Pollak. Thank you for tuning into the show. We have a packed one coming at you. You are going to be hearing from UFC President Dana White, Daniel Cormier, Anthony Johnson, Chris Weidman, a clip from Jon Jones, and of course, Cody Saftic is joining us. But our big guest on the show, UFC flyweight champion Demetrious Johnson. All of that is coming your way on this loaded edition of the MMA Report. Not going to waste any time. It is time to get into the news of the week.
This just in.
We start off with the words that every child fears come summer holidays. We are going back to Buffalo, the site of UFC 210 at the KeyBank Center on Saturday night. The main event saw Daniel Cormier replicate the finish of his first victory over Anthony Johnson. This time the finish came in the second round with some curious decisions made by Johnson to wrestle with Cormier despite the advice of his corner. Cormier was able to get to the back of Johnson and submit him with a rear naked choke. Johnson, ever the poker player, said he will take your "why did you wrestle Daniel Cormier" stunned reaction and will raise you with "I bet you never figured I'd be retiring at the age of 33, which is exactly what Johnson did after the fight. Johnson cited a job that he is taking, but was ultra secretive about what the job entails. But give this guy credit for upping everyone's curiosity with this answer.
What I got planned next?
What are you doing?
Oh, baby.
On a personal level, Anthony Johnson's final post-fight media scrum featured a great moment in which Anthony Johnson clearly had no idea who one reporter's identity was.
I went out the way on my own terms. Nobody made me do it. This was nothing medical. This was nothing with family or anything like that. It's just something else that I want to do in my life. You know what I mean? So I've had 2 title shots, and it's been fun. It's been amazing, and I wouldn't be Rumble Johnson if it wasn't for mixed martial arts and UFC. So I just want to say thank you to everybody, the fans, the other organizations that let me fight for them, my family, friends, everybody, you guys. I've had a pretty, I think, long career, and got in arguments with this guy over here. No, not you. I thought you was Ariel, bro. Sorry. So,
I mean, who could possibly have been mistaken for Ariel Helwani? I mean, I assume probably similar height, maybe a shaved head. Of course, all Canadians do look alike. So clearly it must have been... Oh, shit. It was me, wasn't it? Meanwhile, controversy erupted as Gegard Mousasi was awarded a TKO victory over Chris Weidman. This result came after Mousasi landed a knee to the head of Weidman, with referee Dan Miragliotta stepping in with the belief that the knee was illegal. It wasn't. But after consulting with referee Big John McCarthy, Miragliotta realized it was a legal strike, but the doctor didn't believe that Weidman could continue, and the fight ended due to a legal blow, and thus Mousasi had his arm raised. Later, it was revealed that the New York State Athletic Commission can actually use video evidence to help make a decision when there is a discrepancy. Needless to say, Chris Weidman was pissed.
Very frustrating. I mean, obviously, it's nothing to do with Gegard. It sucks for him too. Well, he gets a win, so it doesn't suck that bad. But at the end of the day, I was told that it's an illegal knee multiple times. Said I had 5 minutes over and over again. And then next thing I know it, they go to a replay and say it's a legal knee, but you're not allowed to use a replay in New York. So how does that happen?
Do you contemplate appealing this to the commission?
Yeah, definitely appeal, but more than that, I want a rematch. I want 3 rounds, fair 3 rounds without some stupid crap like that.
Mousasi is now a free agent, which presents an intriguing bidding war that could erupt, with UFC President Dana White stating he wants to keep Mousasi, and the end result should be a strong contract for Mousasi wherever he ends up signing. But the New York State Athletic Commission issues did not begin with the Mousasi-Weidman fight. No, they got everyone dialed into fight week with a Friday morning discovery that Pearl Gonzalez has breast implants. Yes, the same Pearl Gonzalez that had been in Buffalo all week long, interacting with UFC and commission officials, the same Pearl Gonzalez that claimed she disclosed this fact to the commission ahead of time, was not alerted until after weighing in on Friday that fighting with breast implants is not allowed in the state of New York. So the fight was off. Then the commission spoke with Gonzalez's physician, and a few hours later, the fight was back on. So unless fighting with breast implants got a whole lot safer in that time frame, maybe it's not the most logical restriction to have in place. The other side of the equation was Cynthia Calvillo, her opponent, who won the fight on Saturday night and afterwards explained what she went through on Friday when she was alerted the fight was off.
No, I was mad. I was actually mad. I was like, yeah, I'll roll with the punches. I'll try to stay positive, but they pretty much when I found out that there's a possibility the fight wasn't going to happen, I ran back there and I was like, what is that? Do I have a fight or not? This is crap. And I was like, I just thought it was bullshit because well, if you guys know why, I mean, it was because she had breast implants, and Miesha Tate already fought in New York, and they let her fight. So when I heard that there's a possibility that wasn't going to happen, I was like, this is some fucking bullshit, So I was pissed off. She might have been into her positive juju shit, whatever. I wasn't. I don't, you know what I mean? I work hard. I can roll with the punches. But once I found out there was a possibility I wasn't going to have a fight, great. If it was a thing where, oh, my pinky's jammed and that might bother me, yeah, I'll stay positive through that. But you tell me I'm not going to fight at all after all the hard work, I'm going to be mad. Hello. There's literally 99% chance that the fight wasn't going to happen. Dana White pulled it off. Thank you, boss. We had a fight.
And finally, Jon Jones resurfaced. Yes, the former light heavyweight champion decided Buffalo was the place to come out of hiding to address the light heavyweight title picture and those damn sex pills.
I have been in the UFC for many years, many years, and I've taken sex pills several times throughout my adult life. Highly recommend it, guys. Fucking great. Anyways, never failed a drug test. Never once failed a drug test.
What a moment of zen. That is your news of the week. Now we are going to hear a chat with UFC light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier. This came after his win over Anthony Johnson as he spoke with members of the media in Buffalo. It seemed like a fight, Dan, that in especially the first and then even into the second, every inch you were going to force this guy to go to war for. And was that the plan, to just really exhaust him and make sure everything was going to be a battle?
Costs. Everything costs something. You're not getting anything easy. Even if you want to take me down, I'll get right back up and make you start working right back again. You want to clinch me and hold me? I'll just grab your head and put all my weight on top of you. I was just going to make him carry my weight as long as I can get him to carry my weight. Make him work. And you saw he had that big. He tried to he tried to stay within himself a little bit, and then he had that big explosion where he kicked me in the head through the second head kick, and in the second round threw a couple punches and then just charged me again. I think when things aren't going exactly his way, he panics a little bit, and at the end of the day, he's a wrestler, so he goes back to what he knows.
Did you sense that panic?
I did. Especially when we're on the ground, because I had I had like a bar arm, and I was punching him with my free hand. He wasn't really doing anything, so I just started kind of letting him go, and Big John said, improve your position, and so he moved a little bit, so I was like, okay, let me chase the submission.
I'm a pretty perceptive person, Daniel, and when we were chatting with you yesterday, I don't think you wanted to chat with us all that much about the towel and everything that went on. Was it a stressful morning? Was the weight cut a rough one for you? How can you assess now, a day removed? And
that's one I've had so far, 100%. Allow myself to get too big in the off time. My nutritionist today is better than my nutritionist when I initially started making 205. Daniel Leith is the best, but I was letting myself get too heavy. I can't do that anymore.
Was it a source of pride for yourself being here in Buffalo? I mean, first of all, you and Anthony sold a ton of tickets in Toronto. The fight gets moved here, and here's a full building in Buffalo, New York, and Jon Jones is watching your fight. I mean, there had to have been did you have a moment to take this in, a full arena for your title defense with Anthony?
This region's been great to us. Like you said, 2 events in 4 months, and we've sold them both. So, yeah, it meant a ton. It's just, with the whole thing with Jones, it's just unfortunate because he's from here. And at one point he said he would rather fight here than in Madison Square Garden. And because of his indiscretions, can't even do it.
Because of everything that he's done, can he ever be considered the best of all time in your mind?
I think he already is. I don't sit here and lie. I mean, I think he's one of the greatest fighters of all time, if not the greatest fighter of all time. I respect his skill in the octagon. We fought, and he fought hard the whole time. I haven't had anybody fight me as hard as he did for 25 minutes and stay the course. Yeah, I respect him as a fighter. We just don't mix well.
And we're back here. Joining us, as always, is Cody Saftic from the Fight Network. Cody, we've got lots to discuss from both last weekend and going into this weekend. It seems that whatever lull there was, we're over that now.
Yeah, right back into the thick of things. Lots of cards coming up, lots to talk about, things to keep interesting. But that's what we talked about last week. When there's no event, it allows you to have more of a build-up. When there's events, when there's weeks where there's just so many events, you're jumping right back into the thick of things. So let's get at it.
Poor Leandro Higo this weekend in Budapest. I don't know how much attention he is getting for his titled opportunity against Eduardo Dantas.
I'll tell you what, that's one of the better bantamweight signings that they've had. I've always thought that Bellator's had a fairly weak bantamweight division when you're considering not the talent that's in the bantamweight division, but that there's only really like 5 guys. And it always seems that Warren's challenging Dantas, and Dantas is fighting Galvao, and Galvao's having you try to throw in guys like LC Davis, but no one's really gaining any momentum. I think that you bring in a guy like Leandro Higo, 17-2 as a pro, known as a finisher, known as the RFA champ, the LFA champ. Guy's very entertaining. Guy's probably should have been signed to the UFC. I know that there was a lot of inquiries about his services, so it's nice that the Bellator promotion lands him. But you throw him on top of there with Michael McDonald, who recently just signed to Bellator as well. All of a sudden, you got some interesting 135-pound challengers.
What did you think of Saturday's doubleheader? I mean, this was not the most intriguing Bellator card on paper, and I think coming out of it, it completely, to me, was lost going against a pretty notable UFC pay-per-view. Did you think this worked, or did you feel that, especially when it's a pay-per-view card of that caliber, that Bellator is kind of going to be forgotten in the dust?
Yeah, I was really hoping for their sake that it would work out in their favor. I thought maybe 3 o'clock fight start time, that leads you into the Bellator kickboxing. The Bellator kickboxing was leading you into the UFC prelims. I thought you could make a day out of it. I thought that it might benefit them, but I'm not going to lie. I was on a train for most of the day on Saturday, and Bellator was almost a side thought. You knew that the UFC was coming on at 9. You knew the prelims was going to start early. It was a 13-fight prelim. You had so much MMA coming your way that you weren't exactly excited to seek out Bellator, which I did, and I thought that the show was rather underwhelming. I mean, not exactly one of their star-studded affairs, and the local Italian crowd didn't exactly seem to be in full force. A lot of empty seats there at the actual venue itself. The Melvin Manhoff fight versus Carvalho, it played out very, very lackadaisical, very slow pace, and similar to the first encounter, minus the fact that an absolutely crushing head kick ends it. And then other people on the card that they're trying to build up stars like Anastasia Yankova, and I don't know that it's working. If you don't have the goods to actually sell the fight for what it is a fight, then it's tough for them. So if they're going to go to these international markets, they have to put on these bigger shows. This upcoming fight in Budapest, Hungary, it has a good main event. Aside from that, you got Daniel Weichel on the co-main event, so I think that's going to be a good co-main event as well. But beyond that, what are you really trying to bring to the table, right?
And for all that's been said about the fact that this was close to as live, I think they were off by it was like a 20-minute delay, something like that, because I was seeing the results of the main event right as it was airing. But nonetheless, they made this live, close to live, and it ended up with 438,000 viewers for the MMA portion. So it's an argument, Cody, that taking Bellator out of prime time, even if it's live, it would have been better served to air in prime time. Granted, Saturday night was not optimal because you'd be going head up against a UFC pay-per-view, but even if it were to air on a delay and air 8 till 10 as a lead into the pay-per-view, I think you would have done a lot better on tape delay than 438,000 viewers. That's a really low Bellator number.
Yeah, well, to my knowledge, the fights were live because I thought I was watching them live. But what I looked at was, let's say when they went to Israel, for example, that is a bona fide tape delay. So you know the results if you really search hard
24 hours.
But you can't really, they're not readily available. You can't see the footage on it. So if you really do want to see the Koreshkov fight, you really do want to see Noah Lahad, whatever the case is, you're going to wait, you're going to watch it on the tape delay. The tape delay numbers for that event did quite well. This is the case where they were playing the Bellator early on in the day. And instead of replaying the event once again in prime time, Bellator kickboxing came out afterwards. So I tried to switch back at one point after the event had already concluded during the UFC prelims, and only then could you see John Wayne Parr on the Bellator kickboxing portion of it. So this one to me was, they've had a lot of complaints from Spike UK and a lot of their international audience that they want to see the fights live. If you're in the UK, you can't even watch these fights live unless you're physically in the building. I think that caused them to make this card more readily available, make it as close to live as possible. And as a result, they weren't able to benefit from the fact that it would have been playing at 9 o'clock. So at least some viewers were going to take the free option over the pay-per-view.
Yeah, and that Bellator 164 card has pulled up the numbers here from last November. That was the card in Israel, and on a 24-hour delay, that card did 555,000 viewers, but the main event peaked with 842,000 viewers watching Andrei Koreshkov and Douglas Lima. So that tells you there that, yes, you can throw logic out the window as to why a card on such a delay would be hurt. But Cody, there's a lot of people that aren't surfing for Bellator results. And if there are fights on a Friday night, I think people are kind of used to that. And fights do better in prime time, even if they're live, like this Saturday afternoon thing. I mean, not to say it was this disaster, but I feel that it's kind of been learned in the past. Glory tried this once, doing a Friday afternoon card for, I believe it was a card in France. And it did awful. Even though you had the live factor. But I didn't think we were going to discuss this much Bellator to start things off. Just going back to UFC 210, we won't go through everything, but what was your favorite controversy that came out of Friday and Saturday?
Yeah, you would have to go with the Chris Weidman knees, because that was shaping up to be a good fight, man.
It was a good fight up until the end.
I've seen disqualifications. I've seen no contests. I've seen whack things before where you're almost glad. A little part of you is like, well, at least the fight's over. This is really, okay, we got Weidman first round. Weidman's winning the second round. He gets the takedown. He gets to mount at one point. Mousasi gets up. Mousasi's clearly doing the damage. This is a close round too. Even if they would have taken a point deduction off Mousasi, or the real call should have just been resume the fight, it was shaping up to be a good fight. I think when you end it like that, massive controversy. Also, it happens to happen in New York again, which, surprise, surprise, it seems like most controversies these days happen to revolve around that particular commission. But undoubtedly, I mean, what a way to ruin a good fight. And I'd have to say that was the big controversy of the weekend.
Yeah, and I mean, there was just a lot of impact out of this decision. This is now Chris Weidman's third loss in a row. And while I think you kind of put an asterisk next to this loss, it's still a loss. It still goes down as such. And, there's no evidence that they can just make this fight immediately, because now Gegard Mousasi is in an interesting position as a free agent where this is a guy that has stated he wants to be paid what he is worth. And I think this guy's whoever he signs with, he's going to come out of this with a pretty strong deal, you have to imagine, because I can't fathom Bellator not throwing a lot at him.
Yeah, you would think so, but at the same time, he's going in there and he's commanding a big offer. I mean, he's making the issue in his sense. I'm not getting paid enough money. I want to get paid more money. That's really the point he's trying to push home. If you're Bellator, yeah, you'd love to scoop this guy, but at what point? At what point can you go out there and you can afford to bring in a guy like this? And obviously they're going out and they're spending big money on free agents, but it's big money relative to what big money actually is. When Georges St. Pierre became a free agent, there was a lot of talks of, Bellator is going to talk to him, Scott Coker is going to talk to him. They could have never gotten Georges St. Pierre because they don't have the pay-per-view model to support it, and they don't have the money value to come out here and say, listen, George, we're going to pay you $5 million and you'll be able to keep your sponsorships on it. They just wouldn't have been able to. It wasn't a feasible option for them. When I look at some of the big stars for the UFC, Mousasi's not a big star, but the guy's already making $250,000 to fight, and he's going to furthermore come out here and say, I'm not getting paid. Well, now you're looking at giving the guy $300,000-400,000 a fight, and I just don't think Bellator would be the promotion to give him $300,000-400,000 a fight. They'd look to sign guys like Lorenz Larkin, and they made an offer for an Aljamain Sterling, taking a guy like Bader, even taking on Leandro Higo. These are all good free agents, guys that they can build, fairly young for the most part, and don't have a price tag like that. So he'll be a big free agent, especially if you look at an ACB or a Fights Nights Russia. Maybe they'll go and qualify and offer to him. They have the kind of money, and because he's a big star in that part of the world, Europe and Russia and Armenia and all that, I could see them making an offer for him, but just because he has a tie to Scott Coker, I don't think that means he's head to Bellator.
The big key, though, is that if UFC wants to match what he is making now, and Bellator, even if they come under slightly, they have two things in their pocket that they can play with. Number one are sponsorships.
Oh, yeah.
And especially if they want to go over to various European areas where Gegard Mousasi will be able to command a lot, I think, on the sponsorship market. And second, I think it would be very much to Bellator's benefit that they don't strap themselves like the UFC does and only only give pay-per-view points to your champions. I would say, listen, it doesn't have to be the level that you can make off a giant UFC pay-per-view, but if you cut a guy in to a couple percentage points on a pay-per-view, you are incentivizing every single guy that is on a pay-per-view to go out and sell that fight, because now you're in business with this pay-per-view doing well. And that's something that is restricted to champions. And we see the inverse effect of that, Cody, when a guy gets to that level, becomes a champion, is getting points on a pay-per-view, loses that title, and you go back to your old set of circumstances without points. And it becomes a tough hill for guys to climb at that point when you're realizing, man, I'm doing all this work and now I'm making less because I'm not incentivized on the pay-per-view.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So if you're Gegard Mousasi, you've got to look at options. And the fact is, this is not a guy that wants to fight for another 5-10 years anyways, but Bellator has a lot of options for him. And what I mean by that is that he can fight Bellator MMA, obviously. He can compete both at 185 and 205 pounds and have lots of success. He can compete in Bellator kickboxing, which, as you know, is starting to take off. They're looking for big name guys, and they're starting to pour some money into that.
He can do commentary.
Well, he can do commentary.
Could you imagine?
I would love to hear him on commentary. That'd be quite something. But they can also cross promote with places like Ryzen. Let him go to Japan. Let him compete there. Kind of put out his services. If they want him once a year for a big New Year's Eve show, then why not lend him out for that big one night New Year's Eve show? It makes sense for a guy like that. Getting back to the Weidman thing really quickly before we move past that, is that, yeah, like you said, it's going to be an asterisk next to it. This is now third loss in a row. But this is not basketball where like the asterisk is, oh, well, you know, his foot was over the line and it probably shouldn't have been a 3-pointer, but don't worry, we play this team again in 6 weeks from now. It's like, that's probably the third massive concussion that Chris Weidman has now suffered.
He got rocked with his knee.
He was absolutely rocked, and I know a degree of that is playing it up, but a degree of that is also that he ate a pair of knees directly into the face. If he didn't know what month it is, I think that in itself is a testament to it, but this is a fighting sport, and at 33 years old, Chris Weidman's taken a lot of damage, so it isn't as simple as let's just book the rematch. We don't know what kind of shape he's in right now. We don't know what kind of shape he's going to be in the foreseeable future, but if you're Gegard Mousasi, you want that quick turnaround. You want to get booked into a high-profile fight. And I look at this weekend's card. I look at a guy like Jacare Souza taking what essentially is a keep busy fight against Robert Whittaker. A dangerous keep busy fight, may I add.
That's the same as this Weidman-Mousasi fight. I don't think...
It's the same thing.
Even Mousasi resigns. Is he that further ahead in the middleweight division after this Weidman win?
And
you just beat a former champion, and you may be in the same spot you were before the win.
The conversation coming out of this, what should be a good win, which should be a second-round knockout win, the conversation coming out of it is, oh, maybe they should just do a rematch. Why? If I'm Mousasi, why would I want to rematch him? That does nothing for me whatsoever. So I think Bellator and Scott Coker, they're more willing to work with the fighters. They're more willing to market them and work towards what their certain goals are. Whereas the UFC, it's such a machine. It's just easy to be, one part of the machine and just get lost in the shuffle.
So this middleweight division is not going to figure itself out until Michael Bisping and George St. Pierre fight. If they fight at this point. Yeah. Do you rule this out for July the 8th? Because that's the date the UFC wants. That's the date Michael Bisping wants. It's not the date George St. Pierre wants. And that International Fight Week card is rapidly approaching. This year they are now doing 2 nights instead of 3, which is probably the smarter play. But they have a main event slot that's open that Daniel Cormier doesn't seem to have any inclination to fight that night when he's getting married at the end of May and plans to go on a honeymoon, and leaves you without a marquee main event for that card.
There's nothing really you can do with Daniel Cormier anyways. I think you're going for a marquee main event on what is a marquee event in total. You want that big headlining fight. And Dana White's gone on the record saying that, the next time Jon Jones come back will be in a co-feature. So that's just not going to sell. And Daniel Cormier, as good of a champion he is, and I love watching Daniel Cormier compete, he's just not that draw. And I think they're looking for something bigger than that. With Anthony Johnson now retiring, Jon Jones still technically being on the sidelines, and your number one contenders in the division, guys like Volkan Oezdemir, in the top 5 or 6, there's nothing readily available.
You don't think Jones Cormier is a pretty big fight? You don't think that that's going to do a solid number?
I think it is. I just don't know where their trust is in a Jones Cormier rematch. I mean, let's say that is the big fight of the card.
You would have to book.
What do you do?
You would have to book. And Teixeira and Gustafsson are all booked up now. But you would want Jimmy Manawa and another key light heavyweight. Maybe though you would have to have 2 other light heavyweights booked on that card, I feel, for that very reason.
Yeah, and then have the understanding of one of you guys might have to jump into the main event if something is to happen. But I just don't know that the confidence is there. And I think if you're a fan of the fight itself, it is growing and it is getting bigger and you do want to see it. But is it going to be that big fight that they're looking for? I'm not so sure. This is a big weekend for them. They obviously want that one crown jewel on it. When you look at St. Pierre versus Bisping, it is very much that. The UFC clearly wants it on that date. Michael Bisping clearly wants it on that date. The fact that George St. St. Pierre hasn't signed, that is troublesome. That is very worrisome because it's not like he's still renegotiating a contract. It's not like he's holding out, trying to leave it to the last minute and squeeze some more money out of it. The contract's already signed. He knows what he's getting. All he has to do is commit to the date, and that's something he's unable to do. I think a lot of it is cold feet. I think when he made his return, you're expecting everyone to be George St. Pierre's back in the triumph return of the welterweight grade. He's going to compete for middleweight gold, but now he almost gets cold feet of, well, what happens if I do beat this guy? Do I have to fight Jacare? Do I have to fight Yoel Romero? And you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, now that I'm reading the forums, now that I'm training with bigger guys in the middleweight division, you know what? Why was I so dominant in the past? Because I'm a big welterweight that can take guys down and dominate them. I'm a small middleweight. All these things are no doubt weren't running through his mind. All these things are running through the fans' minds. I don't know that he signs on the dotted line to take that. And furthermore, if he is going to sign on to take him, then he's going to do the same thing with a potential Anderson Silva fight. Wait it out to the last minute. You see this happen a lot in boxing, whether it be the Marvin Haglers of the world, or maybe it was the Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather situation. It's just no fighter ever fights another fighter in the prime of their career. There's always one or two of the parties that are past the prime of their career. Michael Bisping and George St. Pierre, maybe they're at that point right now, but it seems like George is waiting something out here. I don't know, but my confidence level is not particularly high whether this gets booked soon.
If you were the UFC and you could have a do-over before that press conference to announce this fight,
yeah.
Are you going to the ends of the earth to keep this George St. Pierre return quiet and just booking Michael Bisping and Yoel Romero to keep this division moving forward? Definitely puts Michael Bisping has no incentive to fight Yoel Romero ahead of George St. Pierre when that's such a bigger fight for him. And I think the fact that this was so publicly negotiated, George St. Pierre wanted this fight, Michael Bisping wanted this fight, that's what Bisping was going to hold on to. But no date was announced. No date still has been announced at this point. And man, you have this giant opening now where Anderson Silva needs an opponent. That feels like the fight that you could have easily brought back with George St. Pierre and would have been just as big, if not bigger than Michael Bisping because of the long history between that was always the elusive fight, was having the greatest middleweight and the greatest welterweight fight one another.
Yeah, once again, I think that was probably the fight to put together. You put that fight together, and all of a sudden the middleweight
that
division...
headline's July 8th, and I think George takes that fight on July 8th.
Yeah, and you know what? If you're George St. Pierre, you're taking as much risk. Is the reward there? No, because you're not going to get the title. You're not going to be the two-division champion. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Why not take on Anderson Silva? The fans are clearly interested in, and also, you don't have this giant logjam at 185 pounds. If you're the UFC, I don't think they would have kept it a secret if George St. Pierre's coming back. People kind of knew George was coming back. George is training hard. There's all these contract disputes going on. I think the right thing is to go out, have the press conference and say, listen guys, we've officially signed George St. Pierre. George is coming back. Unknown date in the near future. And we have options for George St. Pierre. Then you float out the idea of, well, we're looking with the McGregor fight. Float out the idea of, if Michael Bisping is to retain his his crown over the number one contender, Yoel Romero, then we can do the George St. Pierre fight. But just float out the ideas, have people interested in that. But you have to move the division along. If you're Michael Bisping, you already got essentially your super fight. This is a guy that a lot of people never thought would win the title. He does win the title. A lot of people then think that this guy will never defend the title, but they give him that Dan Henderson fight. Now he's defended the title. You don't have to give him another opponent. And very much the UFC seems like they're giving the guy a favor. They're doing him a favor by giving him this super fight. I think he should have fought the number one contender. That takes off all these questions about what's going on at 185 pounds. It opens the division up again. George St. Pierre, he's there for super fights. He might have 2 or 3 fights left in his career, and they're only super fights. So why would we stick him into title fights anyways? Why not do exactly what he's been brought in here to do, and that's super fights? And I think Anderson Silva, which is just essentially a super fight, would have done big business for them.
Like if Anderson Silva ends up fighting Uriah Hall at UFC 212.
Wasted opportunity.
It's like, what are we doing with Anderson Silva? There is a value in Anderson Silva fights, but it's not fighting Derek Brunson, and it's not fighting Uriah Hall. And it just feels like we've got this great commodity, but we don't know how to book this guy. We don't know if this guy is just going to be thrown in there with contenders and guys that we feel have enormous upside at middleweight, or are we going to put him in the fights that are most financially rewarding and vis-a-vis the ones the public have the most interest in that they are going to spend money on. And Uriah Hall isn't one of those fights to me.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the comparison between him and Uriah Hall has always been there, so it seemed like a fun fight to do in the past, but that's exactly it. Uriah Hall's not a contender at this point. Uriah Hall's nowhere on the map. And I get Anderson Silva might not be as well, but he's still Anderson Silva. He still has that name. And that fight with Derek Brunson, it was an odd matchmaking to begin with. It was just odd. Why is this fight getting put together? But then there's that what if. What if a guy like Derek Brunson, who is the younger fighter, who is very explosive, what if he goes goes out there and he beats Anderson Silva, and it's a passing of the torch. But you don't get that. What you have is old Anderson Silva in a terrible fight, taking out a guy that conceivably could have been in title talks if he could have strung together a couple more wins. So you have to be super careful what you're doing with an Anderson Silva. And I guess to a certain extent, he's willing to fight all challengers, but he knows that too. He's calling out Nick Diaz. I don't know why he would avoid the Vitor Belfort fight. That almost seems like a given to me to do that rematch. But once again, he's looking for the biggest fights possible. And if you're the UFC, you got to book him in the biggest fights possible as well. But they're at this giant problem right now where who's a big fight, John? We don't really have any big fights for Anderson Silva. If he's going to be tied to a matchup, chances are he's the big name guy in the matchup. And if he fights a guy like Luke Rockhold and all that, to be honest, I have no interest in that. I don't want to see Luke Rockhold fight Anderson Silva. Maybe somebody else does, but you got to book him sparingly. Big super fights is what I keep getting at. Book him in the biggest fight possible. But outside of Georges St. Pierre, outside of, I think, maybe a rematch with Nick Diaz, but certainly a rematch with Vitor Belfort, what big fights are there left for Anderson Silva?
It's a great question. I mean, with Anderson Silva, it just feels like, yes, people have an interest in seeing him, but I think it's got to be the right opponent. And I mean, Calvin Gastelum was fine, but I mean, these are fights that are very much tailored to the guy that's in there with Anderson Silva. And you can also look at the argument of how much a guy truly gets out of beating a legendary figure. I mean, Liam McGeary was no bigger a commodity after beating Tito Ortiz for all the promotion they put into that fight. I mean, sometimes that works, but other times it doesn't, where it's just simply, hey, this is the star and we will watch this guy lose over and over. Chuck Liddell, you can go through numerous fighters where the public just has an interest in seeing them up until a point, though. And
yeah, I could not agree more. I look at Yair Rodriguez as a prime example of that. If you put any other fighter that night in the cage with Yair Rodriguez, he puts on the same performance. People are talking about, wow, Yair Rodriguez looked good. Nobody was talking about how good Yair Rodriguez was looking. They were all talking about how bad BJ Penn was looking. And that in itself is not what the desired outcome of the fight is. If you're going to go out there and you're going to promote Yair Rodriguez, you're going to promote the future by booking him in a matchup with this fading legend, then you want there to be a shine that you can take off that. But even I've been watching a lot of boxing lately, and it's the same thing. A lot of the comment boards always turn to, well, yeah, the win was okay, but people want to see people take on top challengers. And if you're not putting these guys in there, I look at Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum just smashed Vitor Belfort. But once again, the talks are not necessarily, wow, Kelvin Gastelum looks very good at 185 pounds. Some people are talking about that, but a lot of people are talking about, well, this is the end for Vitor, and Vitor just doesn't look the same physically anymore, and Vitor Belfort's probably the end of the road. Well, why not book Kelvin Gastelum against somebody that he can look good against? But instead you put him up against Anderson Silva, and if he goes out there and he has the same performance, even though it's impressive, the talks once again become, well, Kevin Gastelum's just smashing old veterans, I saw the same thing with Chris Weidman coming in this fight with Mousasi, and people were saying the same thing. If you look at Weidman's best wins, they're all old guys. He beat Machida, and he beat Anderson Silva, and he beat guys that were, considered past their prime. Fans realize it. People realize it. They see through that. You can do it once in a while, but you can't just go on a legends crushing tour and do it continuously. It just doesn't work. That's why I always take it back to why I like Bellator's approach to it, because they're at least booking these guys in conceivably winnable fights, as opposed to just letting them go out there and get destroyed.
Quickly looking ahead at this Saturday's Fox card, it's the first time the UFC has been in Kansas City, which is one of the states that did not adopt the new rules. So that's always worth going into a card being aware of.
The fighters should be the ones who are aware of it, but it just doesn't seem like anybody is.
Yeah, it's a growing issue with me of just this annoyance of these ununified rules. However, this is a very good card when you look at a lot of the interesting stories on the undercard. And on top you have, which to me they're really faltering on, is the fact that Demetrious Johnson is in this fight with Wilson Hayes, which is, it's a fight. It's getting to see Demetrious Johnson. That's all I can say about it. It's a fight. But this signifies potentially a really big story that he can tie Anderson Silva's record, and this has not been promoted all that effectively. And I don't know if they're just holding off their resources, that when he breaks the record they can make a big deal out of that. But I don't think it has to be mutually exclusive, that you couldn't really make a big deal out of this, because that would be the biggest spotlight on this card, a free television card, and having a story attached to it, which Demetrious Johnson and Wilson Hayes on their own doesn't have any story attached to it, other than you're seeing one of the great fighters of our generation fighting.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I would assume they're going to do, is try to make it a big thing that if he's going to go out there and break the record. I think very much this is a huge accolade to go out there and tie the record, but when you're tying the record against Wilson Hayes, there's going to be that commotion of, well, he's fighting Wilson Hayes. Well, who has Demetrious Johnson really fought? That's not the way I think, but I think a lot of fans out there, they're always going to be cynical to a great accomplishment, and that's probably the one thing that you can be cynical about in the career of Demetrious Johnson, is that he hasn't always fought the top contender, not because they weren't the next best guy in line at that time, just because none of these contenders ever really jumped off the map. He has a couple key victories, no doubt, but Wilson Hayes, a fight that was already booked before, lost that interest. No one's jumping off to see it. To that tune, you've got Demetrious Johnson defending against what technically is the number one contender, and he's a 9-1 favorite, John. So it's hard to sell that he's about to do some great feat when he's almost foregone conclusion that he's expected to do this big feat. He fought Tim Elliott, and you look at those scorecards, they're pretty dominantly one-sided for Demetrious Johnson. But people are saying, whoa, Tim Elliott gave him a go. It's like the expectation.
He went around.
The expectation.
That's where we're at right now.
I know, it's shocking.
To me, that fight is one of the more impressive ones with Demetrious Johnson, because how many fighters would have responded after that first round in the way Demetrious Johnson did? He figured him out and shut down Tim Elliott for the remaining 20 minutes of that fight. And I think it's a versatility that not every top-end fighter possesses when they're fighting such a drastically just a difference of opponent in Tim Elliott. I mean, someone that was given, I don't know what the odds were for that fight, but probably 9-1 would be generous going into that one. I would have made that a big part of this fight, that, hey, Demetrious Johnson, there was a guy that won a round with him, and it's just like pushing this as something that Wilson Hayes is a, former Elite XC champion, someone that is can possess any kind of problems for him. But to me, the story is the biggest thing, that there's none of that going into this. It's just presented like any other card. And that's where just presenting fights, you're going to have a limited audience. You need to be able to have these bigger, larger than life stories that connect with people that are not listening to this show, for instance, that are not consuming this day to day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Listen, if you're coming off that last UFC 210 card, right, and there's a lot of good fights on the card, you consume that, you watch the fights. Maybe a lot of people from Canada went down to the fights themselves. Now you're coming back from that. You're removed from going to the event. You're removed from buying the pay-per-view if you decide to stay at home, whatever the case may be. But now you're going into another card right away, where you're not familiar with the guys on the card. You didn't really have the chance to look at the card. But this is a title fight that's on free TV. As you mentioned at the top of it, Demetrious Johnson's one of the great champions of the UFC. A lot of good fighters are able to make adjustments, from fight to fight. Great champions can make that adjustment from round to round. And you look at that fight against Tim Elliott, not only does he come back in rounds 2, 3, 4, and 5 and have a dominant performance against Tim Elliott, but you look at that first encounter with John Dodson, where the guy's getting dropped twice in the first 2 rounds and is able to make those adjustments and come back. At the end of the day, Demetrious Johnson, he's had career longevity. He's had a fantastic Hall of Fame worthy career. And when you really look at heavyweights, can mature later on. You could be 35 years old and be in the prime of your life as a heavyweight. But the lower weight classes, it's all about that youthfulness. It's all about that speed and that timing. And Demetrious Johnson is someone who really has stood the test of time. I think these are all great accomplishments for him. But for whatever reason, the crowds just never resonated with him. And if you're the UFC, you're the new UFC's owners, you realize that. You see the numbers. And as a result, you're going to put the guy on free TV. And as a result, they're not going all out on promoting this event. They're almost saving their money and looking to promote other things. But when I look at this card, not only do I think failed and missed opportunity on the main event, but there's other fights that they could have at least done something with. This Alexander Volkov versus Roy Nelson fight, which is on the prelims fight, I think that's a good fight that you can promote. And furthermore, this Tom Fire Kid Duquesnoy, I think this kid could be the future. I have a lot of comparisons between him and Conor McGregor, who is a 2-weight class world champion coming into the UFC as well. This kid's 23 years old. He's buried on the prelims. He's fighting Patrick Williams. The fight has had virtually no coverage in North America whatsoever. But if he goes out there and does to Pat Williams what Conor McGregor went out there and did to Marcus Brimage, this is a guy that you can build off of. He's a European star. He's good looking. He has all the skill in the world. You want to build these kids. But as a result, it just seems like it's not there. The interest is not there. The coverage is not there. There used to be a time where you went on UFC's YouTube channel and there are at least those little stories about these odd fighter here and there that's making his debut. Whether it was just a little vignette or whether it's little, 2 minutes of them back home and a little story about them. Something cool. Just at least fans get, with the new signing coming in. Tom's probably one of the top free agent signings in all of MMA. Bellator was trying to grab his services. A number of European promotions were trying to get his services. That's a big free agent signing. But how many people realistically even heard about him? Probably nobody. And aside from him going out there and having a dominant performance, how many people are even going to see it because it's on the prelim portion of a free card? I don't know. But I feel like if the UFC's biggest issue right now is building stars, it doesn't seem like they're doing everything in their capabilities to push these stars and actually grow them.
Yeah, and when you look down here, I mean, aside from Tom Duquesnoy, who's going to be fighting on the undercard, Bobby Green is back on the show. Tim Elliott is fighting against Louis Smoka. That one's buried underneath here.
Yeah.
Alexander Volkov and Roy Nelson, which is a prelim fight.
These are all prelims and good fights. Absolutely.
Jeremy Stevens is on the main card. Jacare going into the last fight on his deal. That's an excellent fight with Robert Whitaker. And then Rose Namajunas and Michelle Watterson, which I would be stunned if the winner of this fight is not next in line for the winner of Joanna Jędrzejczyk's next title defense.
Yeah, I mean, coming off a weekend where there was a pay-per-view, we were talking about how that pay-per-view was very heavy on the top 2 fights. This is a free card, obviously. Maybe it doesn't have that luster of top 2 fights, but you're getting a title fight at the top of it, and the rest of the card is loaded. This is a very, very solid offering from a Fight Night in Kansas City, essentially, a Fox card from Kansas City. But I like this approach from the UFC of just putting on great fights, entertaining fights, free for the audience, and kind of use that opportunity of free TV to build stars. But now that you have this Fox platform and you have this free TV, to not really market your champion, to not really market some of these prospects and some of these big fights coming up on the undercards. Once again, I know I've already said this, but it just feels like a lost opportunity.
All right. Always a big thank you to Cody Saftic for joining us. You can follow him on Twitter at CJ Saftic, SAFTIC. We are going to hear now from UFC President Dana White, who I got to chat with a bit with other members of the media after Saturday's UFC 210 card. And here is Dana White, first up, chatting about the finish to Gegard Mousasi and Chris Weidman.
Yeah, obviously, there was a mistake made, and it was the referee who made a mistake. And I think that I was just telling Chris's team, if he would have jumped right back up, I think the fight would have continued. But Chris sat there, and they looked at the tape, which they're not supposed to do. A lot of things happen, but at the end of the day, if you look at the way that fight was going, Mousasi was on his way to win that fight. If the thing doesn't go to the ground, hey, does Chris Weidman fight out of it? Anything is possible, but I obviously hate to see things end this way, but it is what it is.
Did you have any communication after Anthony Johnson's announcement in the ring about his retirement, and did that catch you as off guard as it did many others?
Yeah, I had no idea. He just walked by right here. That's the first time I've seen him since he said that. But I have to agree with Daniel Cormier. I think he's got a lot to offer still. I think it's a little early to retire. But on the flip side, I'm one of those guys that if retirement's even remotely in your mind, you should absolutely do it.
CM Punk, any update? Because we get asked a lot.
No, there's no update on him. I know that he wants to give it a shot again, but we haven't talked about it at all.
That was UFC President Dana White following Saturday's UFC 210 card, and we now look ahead to this Saturday night. The UFC is back on Fox, their 24th event on Big Fox, and it is going to be headlined by Wilson Hayes challenging the man that we are going to be joined by next. He is UFC flyweight champion Demetrious Johnson, going after a record-tying 10th title defense. If he is successful, he will tie Anderson Silva's record and then sets up a great story to break that record in his next fight, which, could you imagine if it ended up being Joseph Benavidez, if he beats Ben Nguyen in a couple of weeks, and then Joseph Benavidez, the guy who Demetrious Johnson beat to become flyweight champion in September of 2012 at UFC 152, is the guy that Demetrious Johnson faces to break the record. Interesting story, I feel. Here he is, Demetrious Johnson, on the MMA Report.
Time has come. Flyweight champion of the world. Flyweight champion of the world. Time has come. Hey, girl. Take it to the back of the club and pop it, don't take this the wrong way. I've been picking that ass, and if you give it my chance, I ain't gon' play. I really want to get to know you, that's what I told you, girl, you know I don't play. I want to put it in your mouth, girl, you better do what the song say.
In regards to Wilson Hayes, this fight was attempted to be put together last summer. Was this an opponent that you had all asked for, that you felt did deserve this title fight after this didn't happen last summer? Was it someone you actively asked for after the Tim Elliott fight, or was it just presented to you as such after?
Well, this is just something the UFC wanted to make happen afterwards, Obviously, I had an injury against getting ready for him the first time, and so after I fought Tim Elliott, he had 2 fights. There's like, hey, let's make it happen. He was on a little hot streak too.
After the Tim Elliott fight, and I'm curious what the what the procedure is for you when you sit down and watch a fight and you review a fight. Who is the team around you that you are sitting down, and what is that experience like the first time you sit down and watch a fight, and things that you learn that when you're actively in the fight are maybe not as clear as when you're watching it on tape?
For me, I just focus on letting my coaches break it down, the video. I watch the video too, then we all come together as a team, and then we give our input, and I give them my input and see if it's correct or not, and that's pretty much how it goes.
Is it ever a difficult process for you watching yourself fight?
No, not at all, because I always have to ask questions and see if my thought process is right or not. And my coaches are completely honest with me, like, no, that's not how it's supposed to go, or no, that's how it's supposed to go. So for me, it's never hard watching myself fight, just because, it's something I love to do, and I love to learn, and I love to ask questions.
I've seen that you've also been training with a Canadian, Gary Mangat. Have you worked with him for a while, or was this something for this camp that you two have worked together?
We worked together for a while now, a long time. So he's a great guy, up-and-coming guy, and he's really good training partner.
And he has a fight coming up in just a couple of weeks, correct? Over in Asia or India?
India, he does.
Is he like under Matt Hume? Is Matt Hume like coaching with him, or is he just kind of he's got his own coaching staff in place?
He's got his own coaching staff in place. He works with Viviano Fernandez. So with that being said, Viviano brought him back a couple times, and then we had a relationship with him, and we realized he's a great training partner, same weight class, a big 125er, quick southpaw. So we brought him down, and he comes down to get some rounds in with me as well. And it worked out for both parties.
Whenever there is a big card on Fox, and I classify this as one of them, I mean, a lot of casual fans, they attach themselves to big stories. And I think this one has a really captivating one in what you're going after. Do you feel that has been promoted here for the fact that you are tying this historic record? And especially coming out of this, there's even a bigger story to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the UFC has so much stuff going on with them right now. With just all the stuff, like with fighting and the UFC cards, and trying to make sure everybody makes weight and advertise it. So I think they're doing a good job. And honestly, I'm just focused on just going out there to go out there and win.
I think it's sometimes, Demetrious, people just simplify like the greatness that we have seen out of you. And when we see other fighters that have made it so clear of that they have this desire to retire undefeated or to be the greatest fighter of all time, it's such an immense pressure that they've placed on their shoulders. And we've seen fighters that falter, and it's very difficult for them to deal with that. And with you, I feel that it's so remarkable that you go fight to fight, and you're doing what so many state they want to do. Do you feel that pressure? How do you alleviate that and just simplify it to just one fight at a time?
You have to simplify it one fight at a time. If you put a lot of pressure on yourself, I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do this, and you're just gonna take all that energy and all that pressure you could have, when you put pressure on yourself, it takes a lot of energy. So for me, I put the energy into training and, make sure my health, nutrition, and that's pretty much it. So with that being said, as long as I just focus on myself, everything else will take care of itself. Whether I see way too many champions, way too many athletes put so much pressure on themselves and then they falter, their whole life is destroyed. I won't let that be, whether I'm successful or not, or if I fail this Saturday. So for me, I just focus on being the best I can, and that's all I can ask for.
As you're looking, I mean, is this where you just assume that if this record is ever achieved, it's just on to the next set of goals? Do you look at beyond that? I mean, if you retired tomorrow, you would be an instant Hall of Famer. Are you looking beyond that? Just once I set this record, then it's just a race to how high can I set the bar for the next person that wants to come along and try and challenge this record?
Yeah, absolutely. It's on to the next point and see how much money I can make and see how high I can set it. I'm only 30 years old. I'm still young, so I got a lot more I can do.
For this fight being in Missouri, this is not one of the states that has adopted the new rules that were voted on at the ABC Commission last summer and then instituted on January the 1st. Do you find it to be frustrating as a fighter now that there are certain states that you have to essentially tailor so many little changes state to state. It's not the unified rules anymore between all the states that you may fight in.
No, I don't really worry about it. I really just focus on, when I talk to the referee in the back leading the rest of my fight, ask him all the questions I need, and then I just go out there. I know all the rules for the most part. No eye gouging, the headbutting, kicking in the balls, and choking, and all that stuff. So I just focus on asking the questions I need to know, and then that's about it.
If you had the ideal scenario, Demetrious, like given that there's going to be a large audience on Saturday and not overlooking Saturday, that if you were to break the record, would you want to do it on Fox? Because I think that there's a giant promotion there to build this around something historic happening and having such a large audience on Fox.
Yeah, Fox is awesome, man. I mean, I grew up watching, basically have my television on Fox. So I'm happy to be fighting on Fox, and I'm looking forward to doing my thing there.
Thank you to Demetrious Johnson for joining us. Once again, it's the UFC on Fox card this Saturday night, 8 Eastern on Fox, but the prelims feature a lot of interesting names underneath. You've got Aljamain Sterling on the Fight Pass portion taking on Augusto Mendes. Aljamain Sterling, he's just had a pair of split decision losses that have certainly taken the momentum away from him as a bantamweight that everyone had their eyes on towards the end of 2015. And now he's in a position where very much needs that W. On to the televised prelims. Tim Elliott and Louis Smolka are fighting on the television undercard. This was after Tim Elliott had that incredible first round against Demetrious Johnson in his last outing on the TUF finale. And Louis Smolka, another guy very much in need of a win at flyweight. That one is kind of hidden on the undercard, but worth checking out. Bobby Green, always a fun fighter to watch, takes on Rashid Magomedov. As Cody and I were discussing, Tom Duquesnoy will be making his UFC debut at bantamweight. He's also fought at featherweight in the past, takes on Patrick Williams, and a lot of people very high on Duquesnoy. And the televised prelims headlined by Alexander Volkov, the former Bellator heavyweight champion, taking on Roy Nelson. And then onto the main card, Jeremy Stevens in his first fight since the loss to Frankie Edgar last November at 205 at Madison Square Garden. He takes on Renato Moicano at 145 pounds. Ronaldo Jacare Sosa going into the final fight on his UFC deal, which was reported by Ariel Helwani this past Monday, takes on Robert Whittaker. That's a great fight at 185 pounds. And then you have Rose Namajunas against Michelle Watterson, and headlined by Demetrious Johnson and Wilson Hayes. Plus, we've got Bellator. That is going down Friday night from Budapest. Eduardo Dantas defending his bantamweight title against Leandro Higo. Ryzen has a card this weekend. It's a busy one for mixed martial arts. We will have all the fallout on next week's show. UFC next weekend, they're in Nashville for that card that is headlined by Artem Lobov. And our guest next week, Cub Swanson. We'll chat with him about headlining this show against Lobov and that incredible fight of the year he had with Doo-Ho Choi back in December in Toronto at UFC 206. That's coming up next week on the show. I want to thank all of our guests, Demetrious Johnson, Cody Saftic, Daniel Cormier, Anthony Johnson, Chris Weidman, Dana White, Jon Jones, everyone who you heard from over the past hour. Thank you very much. You can follow me at I am John Pollock on Twitter. Subscribe to the MMA Report with John Pollock on iTunes. And the show drops every Thursday at liveaudiowrestling.com and fightnetwork.com. That is it for me. Have a great weekend.